In 1908, Americans sent 677 million postcards. That number sounds impossible until you do the math. There were about 89 million people in the United States that year. That's roughly 7.5 postcards sent per person, including infants and people in rural areas with no reliable mail access. In cities, educated households were sending and receiving dozens of cards a week. Historical collections include examples of people exchanging multiple cards per day with their closest friends, the way we might text. This was the primary way ordinary Americans shared images, communicated casually, announced visits, documented their travels, and participated in public life. And almost all of it was made possible by one convergence: a printing technology that finally made mass image reproduction cheap, and a postal policy that made distribution nearly free.
In the mid-1800s,
Sending a letter in the United States cost between 3 and 10 cents depending on distance, at a time when a laborer might earn 10 cents an hour. The postage alone was prohibitive for frequent, casual correspondence. And even if you could afford the stamp, a letter required paper, an envelope, ink, a pen, and enough literacy to compose something coherent. It was formal. It was effortful. It was not something most people did lightly. Photography existed, but was expensive and technically demanding. A portrait photograph in the 1860s cost roughly what a day's wages bought. The idea of casually sharing an image of where you were, what you were doing, or what something looked like, the way we share photos today, was not a realistic option for ordinary people. What the postcard solved, at its core, was the problem of lightweight visual communication. A picture, a short message, an address, and a stamp. That's it.
and making that possible,
Required cracking two separate problems. How do you print an image cheaply enough to put it on a 1-cent card, and how do you get that card anywhere in the country for a price that makes it worth sending? The printing problem was solved by chromolithography. Chromolithography is a color printing technique developed in the mid-1800s that works by applying color one layer at a time, using a series of stone or metal plates, each plate inked with a single color and pressed onto the paper in sequence. A finished chromolithograph might use 10 or 15 separate passes to build up a full-color image. Done well, the results were extraordinary: vivid, saturated, detailed images that rivaled painting in their color richness and that could be reproduced thousands of times from the same set of plates. The technique had been used for advertising posters, trade cards, and decorative prints since the 1840s.
but by the 1880s,
German printers had industrialized it to a degree that made it applicable to something as small and cheap as a postcard. German printing houses, particularly those in Saxony and Bavaria, had developed the machinery, the labor force, and the supply chains to produce chromolithograph postcards at a cost that made them commercially viable at a penny or two per card. This is one of the less celebrated facts about the American postcard golden age. The majority of the most beautiful American postcards from 1893 to 1914 were actually printed in Germany. The quality was simply better than what American printers could produce at equivalent cost. American publishers would photograph or illustrate their subjects: a hotel in Chicago, the boardwalk in Atlantic City, a local landmark. Ship the image files to German printing houses and receive finished cards weeks later to sell to American consumers. That arrangement came to an abrupt end in 1914 for reasons that should be obvious. But before we get there, the postal piece. The printing technology made cheap postcards possible. The postal infrastructure made them irresistible. In 1898, Congress passed the Private Mailing Card Act, cutting postage for privately printed cards from 2 cents to 1. At a time when a letter still required an envelope and a 2-cent stamp, a postcard required nothing but the card itself and a penny. The friction of sending one dropped to nearly nothing. The effects were not subtle. Card production and sales roughly tripled in the years immediately following the rate change. But the real explosion came in 1901, when Congress authorized the use of the words postcard on privately printed cards, and again in 1907, when the divided back postcard was introduced, the format we'd recognize today, with the left half of the back reserved for a message and the right half for the address.
Before 1907,
Postal regulations required the entire back of a postcard to be reserved for the address. Any written message had to go on the front of the card, crowded around or over the image. The divided back changed everything. Now you could write a full message on the back and still have a clean image on the front. Postcard sales exploded. 1907 and 1908 were the 2 peak years of American postcard production, and those 677 million cards sent in 1908 represent a volume that the postal system would not see again for decades. What were people actually sending? They sent images of places. Enormous quantities of cards documented hotels, train stations, courthouses, main streets, storefronts, parks, beaches, and natural landmarks. If you wanted to tell someone where you were, or show them somewhere you'd been, a postcard was the only realistic option available.
The tourism industry
Understood this immediately. Hotels distributed cards featuring their own buildings as a form of advertising that their guests would mail across the country on their behalf. They sent greetings, birthday cards, Christmas cards, Easter cards, Valentine's Day cards. The entire commercial greeting card industry, as we understand it today, was built on the infrastructure of the postcard era. Before Hallmark, there were postcard publishers producing seasonal designs by the millions. They sent news. The day a building was completed, the day a flood hit, the day a public figure visited town. Events that today would generate thousands of social media posts were documented on postcards within days. Some of the most historically valuable photographic records of American disasters, parades, and public events from the early 20th century survive only because a local photographer shot the scene and turned it into a postcard within the week. And they sent the mundane.
Scholars of the period
Have found postcards that say things like, "Arrived safely, weather fine, we'll see you Thursday," the equivalent of a text message, sent across town or across the country for a penny. People used postcards the way we use text messages for the same reason. They were fast, cheap, and required almost no effort. The postcard industry that grew up around this demand was substantial. Publishers, printers, distributors, wholesalers, retail card stands in every drugstore and hotel lobby. The supply chain behind 677 million annual cards was an economic ecosystem. Photographers built careers shooting postcard subjects. Artists designed seasonal card series that sold in the millions. Collectors, and there were millions of them, with organized clubs and trade publications, drove a secondary market in rare and high-quality cards.
the person who ran the card rack
At a resort hotel in the summer of 1907 was operating what was, functionally, a content distribution business. They curated which images got displayed, which ones sold, which subjects drove repeat purchases. The logic is not entirely different from what a social media platform does today, except the monetization ran through ink and cardboard rather than advertising algorithms. Then it ended. The collapse of the golden age of postcards was not caused by a single event, but World War I did most of the damage in a short period of time. The war cut off the German printing supply chain overnight. American printers scrambled to fill the gap, but they could not match the quality or cost of the German chromolithography houses, and the cards they produced were noticeably inferior. Paper and ink costs rose with wartime demand. Postal rates increased. The 1-cent rate that had made casual postcard sending trivially cheap went up to 2 cents in 1917, doubling the cost of every card sent. At the same time, telephone penetration was rising. In 1900, there were roughly 1.4 million telephone subscribers in the United States. By 1920, there were 13 million. The telephone didn't replace postcards entirely, but it took the urgent, time-sensitive communication that had driven high-frequency sending, "I'll arrive Thursday," and gave people a faster alternative. The cultural moment passed. Postcard collecting faded. The card stands thinned out. By the 1920s, the volume of postcards being sent had dropped dramatically from its 1908 peak, and it never recovered. The postcard printing press created several things we still live with today. It created the commercial greeting card industry. It created the tourism photography industry. It created the idea that a photograph of a place was a product you could buy, send, and collect. It created the postcard-sized format that influenced graphic design for the next century. And it demonstrated something that every communications technology since has rediscovered. When you lower the friction of sharing images to nearly nothing and make delivery cheap enough that cost isn't a factor, people will share images of where they are, what they're doing, and what their world looks like at a volume that looks almost incomprehensible from the outside. 677 million postcards in 1908. Around 35 billion photos uploaded to Instagram in 2020. The medium changed, the impulse didn't. If this video reframes something you thought you already understood, drop a comment. What surprised you most? I read every one. And if you want more videos like this, the technology behind the history, the infrastructure behind the culture, subscribe and hit the notification bell. New video every week. I'll see you in the next one.